Hey again, today we have a double bill, a Q&A, and a few revisions. We'll get into the revisions in a few though. For now, it's Q&A time. Also, while I think of it, next week or the week after, I should have my pop filter finally, so in the meantime, sorry for the issues the lack thereof causes. Anyway, so today's question is, you said something about writing a book. How will this impact Saorsa's development? Righty-o. So, for those who aren't aware, I've recently, as in the past week, started the initial research for writing a book. In particular, this book's going to be based on the Fundamental Fantasy series, but a lot more organized. It'd be hard not to be. Essentially, the goal is to have a resource for those who are new to role-playing game design to cover the basics and get them thinking about certain concepts like player psychology, mechanics cohesion, organization, and so on while they make their game. Now, the issue here was that the book was originally just going to be a small resource made for the RPG design subreddit. And then as I was discussing the concept with one of the moderators in terms of what was needed to be done for it to be useful, we kind of came to the conclusion that the resource I had in mind would be useless to the target audience without first covering some basic game design theory. And then that realization grew to the larger realization that there was an awful lot of stuff that needed to be covered. And then they were like, yeah, write a book. We don't have anything like that in this industry. And it's desperately needed, and you can totally do that. So apparently I'm writing a book now. Anyway, if you're curious about the details, I'll go into more of that in later videos. The only other relevant part about the book itself is that it'll be a donate if you feel like a payment model. A lot of people this is aimed towards are those who aren't even sure if they want to invest in the hobby yet, much less turn it into a full-fledged career. A lot of others don't have the cash to invest, even if they wanted to, but the information needs to get out there. So, if you like the idea and want to support it, donations will be gratefully welcomed, but there won't be a financial barrier to entry into the industry, at least not if I'm going to have anything to say about it. Now with that out of the way, how is this going to impact Saorsa's development? It shouldn't too much. I'm at a stage at the moment with Saorsa that I'm mostly just working on rewriting the book with the updated notes I've made over the past few months in preparation for the first playable alpha release version. The upside to this is that I don't need to think too hard on what to do because I've basically already done that part. In case you haven't noticed from these videos, I'm really big on pre-production, so the actual writing part comes after I already know what it is I'm going to write, and it's fairly short in comparison. This means that I won't really have much in the way of conflict for thinking about Saorsa and the book because I'll be mostly able to dedicate my thoughts towards just the book. And the actual writing will be just towards Saorsa's next major version, so there shouldn't be a lot of overlap for a while. Where the overlap will arrive will be when it comes time to write the book out. That's gonna take a bit of time once I have the topics and rough outline set up. I'm gonna hold off on actually writing the book, as in pen to paper, or, well, fingers to keyboard in this case. Whatevs, you get the idea. Until after I'm done with the writing part of Saorsa's update. So, hopefully I can keep the two projects mostly separate. Thinking about one writing on the other, then flip it around with minimal complications. At least that's the theory. And that's really all that needs to be covered on the Q&A for this week, so that leaves us with revisions. I was chatting with a nuclear engineer recently and got some corrections on some errors I made in the Going Nuclear video, so I wanted to clear those up. There's a few other little fixes in the most recent Playing Goddess episode, geological events as well, so we'll cover those right after. This is just being done as a separate video because redoing videos involves many hours of extra work for a 15-second fix and messes up the order of the videos on YouTube, so yeah, it's just easier to do it this way all around. Anyway, first off, where the radioactive stuff in a reactor was off. I previously had information that said it was the control rods, though after thinking about it, that doesn't make any sense, because they're basically magnets for neutrons, metaphorically, not literally, as neutrons have no electric charge. Point is, they're not going to be giving off much radiation because, yeah, they're packed full of free neutrons, but they're kind of locked in place, so they aren't going anywhere. According to my engineer friend, it's the spent fuel, the uranium-238, which is the problem. Apparently the unburned fuel, uranium-235, isn't all that radioactive, oddly enough. You could hold it in your bare hands so long as you wore a face mask, and the real problem there would be the heavy metals toxicity instead. The uranium-238 is the issue, since that remains highly radioactive for a very long time, and it's difficult to shield. The next bit that I'd been misinformed on was that water was claimed to be very good at shielding against the radiation. Not really the case. It just happens to be an awful lot cheaper than steel or any other material you'd use for shielding. After a few months sitting in a used fuel pool, it gets transferred to the above ground storage instead, since Yucca Mountain was going to store all of the USA's spent fuel in one spot, but it never got finished, so instead the spent fuel just sits around at the reactors where it was burned. I'd asked about whether they could just use impure water, such as that generated from fracking, but the issue there is that you don't want to risk there being anything that could become activated by the neutron flux of the reactor and therefore become radioactive. So it has to be clean, pure water, so no corrosion issues, no random crap concerns, as they so eloquently put it, and no debris or other issues of the kind. Next off, the heavy water thing was another point I was mistaken on. It turns out that yes, some reactors do indeed use heavy water, but primarily because it acts as both a moderator and a coolant, which means you can use different enrichments of uranium than if you use something else. So yeah, it's still used by some reactors, but not all, and for different reasons than I'd been led to believe. It specifically is not used for shielding of spent fuel because heavy water costs too much, and there's really no point, since normal water works just as well for that purpose. So yeah, I was actually mistaken on a fair few points, it would seem. Honestly, not that surprising given the nature of the topic, but corrections were in order and have been made. Also, this is a point to be made in terms of game design in general. If you're unsure about something, ask. Seriously, you can do research all day long, but the sources aren't always accurate. Sometimes they dumb stuff down for normal people and something gets lost in the translation. Other times, the information wasn't accurate to begin with. If you're not sure, ask someone who actually works with that kind of stuff. Most people are, in fact, willing to talk about things they know about for accuracy's sake. Few things annoy people who are specialized in something more than seeing a game or movie provide false information, especially if it's science fiction in nature. So they're typically willing to correct you and give you updated information within reason. Note that within reason bit, certain kinds of information you probably can't get reliable information on. Like, I know roughly how several different kinds of nuclear bombs are put together, and the general idea behind how they work. But anything beyond what you'd find on Wikipedia or a documentary is probably information I'm not going to get out of any of my contacts, because that's the kind of stuff you just don't go around telling people due to security concerns. Especially if I'm going to make videos on it that anyone could watch, especially those who can't be trusted with that information. As such, there's certain things you probably can't get information on, but only stuff like national security guarded stuff kind of dealy. Almost everything else is fair game. So yeah, go to a forum or a chat room or even Twitter. Poke someone who works with the stuff you want to cover and just ask a few questions. The chances are they'll be more than willing to inform you so that you don't make them cringe with your mistakes. Two last things of note. In the most recent Playing Goddess video, I made two tiny errors. The first of which was stating Titan was one of Jupiter's moons. It's not, it's one of Saturn's. I don't know, I blame being drunk despite that I don't drink. More likely, I just had a ton of tabs open as usual and lost track of what I was looking up when I was double checking the veracity of my data. So, I probably had a half dozen tabs open about Titan alone and accidentally glanced at something different for a different moon entirely when checking where it was to be certain. So, no biggie, just tiny mistake. So, carrying on. Anyway, the second error was pointing out that glass flows downward over time. Commonly held belief, and I was taught it in school. Sort of false and disproven, not entirely, like it does, but not in the way I thought. See, I only found this out after the video was posted, so here's the correction. See, glass actually is a liquid, specifically a supercooled one, not a solid, but it's so viscous that it takes about 10 million years for it to flow far enough for you to see a visible difference, not a 50 as was suggested in the video. Even more weirdly, while it would get thicker at the bottom, it wouldn't get thinner at the top, but instead the total height of the pane of glass would be lowered instead, meaning that there would be a gap at the top of the window's glass and the window frame, because yay physics. It actually makes a lot more sense after reading up on it, so it's kind of silly not to realize that, but whatevs. Anyway, with that, I'm out of corrections to make for the time being, and I'm out of questions to answer as well, so I'm out in general? Yeah. I guess I'll see you next time.